Right now, there's millions of people living in countries that don't officially exist. They carry passports that most borders won't accept, and they pay taxes to governments that the world refuses to recognize. Join me, I'm gonna count down 15 countries that don't officially exist. Starting with number 15, Bir Tawil on the Egypt-Sudan border. In the Nubian Desert, between Egypt to the north and the Sudan to the south, there's a trapezoid of land about the size of Greater London that belongs to absolutely no one. No country claims it, no government administers it, and it's not a disputed territory, it's something rarer than that. It's an unwanted territory, and it's the only piece of genuinely habitable land on Earth in that condition. The reason neither Egypt nor Sudan wants it comes down to a better piece of land nearby. When the British drew two different borders between the countries in 1899 and then in 1902, one a straight line, one following administrative borders, the two maps created a paradox. Claiming Bir Tawil means accepting the 1902 border, which means giving up the Halib Triangle to the northeast, a larger, more fertile region. Neither country is willing to make that trade, so both claim Halib and neither claims Bir Tawil, leaving it in a permanent legal limbo known in international law as terra nullius, nobody's land. It's got no infrastructure there, no roads, and summer temps that regularly exceed 40 Celsius, and none of this has stopped a small parade of internet-aged adventurers from traveling there and planting flags. In 2014, an American farmer named Jeremiah Heaton drove 14 hours from Egypt, declaring himself king of the Kingdom of North Sudan, and announced his daughter was therefore a real princess. A Russian DJ followed, declaring it the Kingdom of Middle-earth. An Indian entrepreneur planted sunflowers and appointed himself the prime minister and his father as president, and none of these claims have been recognized by anyone. The United Nations, when it was asked, said its roles don't extend to defining borders, so Egypt and Sudan said nothing. Bir Tawil remains officially no one's. The only people who actually live anywhere near it are the Ababda, who are there long before any map drew a line through their desert, and who have largely reacted to the internet's enthusiasm for claiming their land with the patience of a people who have been watching outsiders misunderstand their territory for a very long time. Number 14. Sealand, North Sea of Suffolk, England. In 1967, a former British Army major named Paddy Roy Bates climbed onto an abandoned World War II naval platform in the North Sea, 7 miles off the coast of Suffolk, and declared it a sovereign nation. He called it the Principality of Sealand, appointed himself Prince Roy and his wife Princess Joan. The platform was originally built to defend the British shipping lanes from the Luftwaffe, and it measured about the size of a tennis court. It had 2 concrete pillars, a rusting iron deck, 30 rooms distributed between the pillars, and it's the kind of view that consists entirely of water in every direction. And it was, as Bates maintained, a country. What followed was pretty extraordinary. Bates introduced a constitution, a national anthem, a flag, a currency called the Sealand dollar that was pegged to the US dollar, and passports. In 1978, a group of German and Dutch businessmen who had fallen out with Bates over plans to build a luxury casino on the platform hired mercenaries to stage a coup while Bates and his wife were abroad. They stormed Sealand and took Bates's son, Michael, hostage. Michael retook the platform, captured the mercenaries, and charged the German ringleader, who held a Sealand passport, with treason. Well, Germany sent a diplomat to negotiate his release. Bates held that the act of sending a diplomat constituted de facto recognition of Sealand's sovereignty. Well, Germany disputed that reading, and the mercenary was eventually released. Germany didn't establish formal relations. Today, Sealand's got a population of approximately 1, a caretaker, while Prince Michael Bates lives in Essex running a fishing business. Sealand holds the Guinness World Record for the smallest entity to claim national status. It generates revenue through an online shop that sells nobility titles. You can be a baron, that runs about £30. Members of Sealand aristocracy include Ed Sheeran, Jeremy Clarkson, and Ben Fogle. The national flag, though, has been carried to the summit of Everest, and no UN member state has recognized it. The UK government official position is that it is an oil rig. Well, the UK also extended its territorial waters to 12 nautical miles in 1987, which technically placed Sealand inside British jurisdiction. Sealand's motto is, "From the sea, freedom." Well, it remains by some margin the most entertaining country that doesn't exist. Number 13. Liberland, the Danube River, Croatia-Serbia border. On April 13, 2015, deliberately chosen to coincide with Thomas Jefferson's birthday, a Czech libertarian politician named Vít Jedlička drove to a 7-square-kilometer strip of scrubland on the western bank of the Danube, planted a flag, and declared the founding of the Free Republic of Liberland. His motto, to live and let live. His vision? No mandatory taxes, voluntary contributions to public services, a government so small as to be almost invisible, and an economy built on cryptocurrency. His territory, a floodplain between Croatia and Serbia that neither country had formally claimed. It was due to a border dispute involving the course of the river. The response had exceeded anything he anticipated. Within 24 hours, 2,000 people had applied for citizenship, and by day 3, the number was 200,000. It eventually reached over 700,000 applicants from people in every country on Earth apparently sufficiently fed up with their government enough to apply to live in a swamp on the Danube. Well, Croatia, which doesn't formally claim the land, but it objects strongly to anyone else doing so, has consistently blocked access to the territory, demolished makeshift structures, and in 2023 banned Jedlička from entering the country for 5 years on grounds of extremist activities. The extremist activities in question were attempting to picnic on a disputed Danube floodplain. Well, nevertheless, Liberland has persisted. It's got a constitution. It even has a court system, a police force, a diplomatic corps maintaining offices in multiple countries, and an annual income of about $1.5 million, according to its own accounts. And it's got a blockchain-based Congress that held its first election in 2024. Zaha Hadid Architects designed a virtual version of the capital in the metaverse for its citizens to inhabit while waiting for Croatia to stop arresting anyone who tries to access it. No UN member state has recognized it. Jedlička had visited Somaliland to discuss mutual recognition, 2 unrecognized states formally acknowledging each other, which is a diplomatic gesture with the approximate legal weight of 2 people in a car park deciding they're both kings. Well, he remains the president of a country whose most real aspects are its cryptocurrency reserves, its citizenship application backlog, and the sheer persistence of a man who decided, on a Tuesday in April 2015, that the solution to bad government was to start a better one on a swamp between 2 countries that have not yet finished arguing about whose swamp it is. Number 12. South Ossetia, the Caucasus in Georgia. In the mountains of the southern Caucasus along Georgia's northern border with Russia, there's a territory of about 3,900 square kilometers and roughly 53,000 people that has declared itself the Republic of South Ossetia. It has its own government, its own flag, its own military, and its own currency, the Russian ruble, since South Ossetia does not produce its own. It's recognized as an independent state by exactly 5 UN member states: Russia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Syria, and Nauru. The remaining 188 countries on Earth consider it part of Georgia. South Ossetia's path to this situation began with the collapse of the Soviet Union when it declared independence from Georgia in 1991 as the USSR fell apart. A brief war followed. A ceasefire left South Ossetia outside Georgian control but without formal recognition from anyone. It settled into the frozen conflict category, one of several post-Soviet territories that exist in a state of permanent political ambiguity. The situation was violently reopened in August of 2008 when Georgia launched a military operation to reassert control. Russia intervened militarily, and a 5-day war resulted in a decisive Russian victory. Russia then formally recognized its independence, which was a move condemned by the vast majority of international community as a violation of Georgia's territorial integrity. Well, today, South Ossetia functions effectively as a Russian protectorate. The ruble circulates there, Russian peacekeepers are deployed, Russian citizens can enter without a visa, and the territory can't be entered from the Georgian side. Georgia does consider anyone who enters from Russia to be illegally crossing into Georgian territory. The border infrastructure here that Russia's built with defenses, barriers, and what now Georgian authorities and human rights organizers called border station has slowly crept southward over the years, incrementally annexing Georgian farmland in a process so gradual that individual farmers have woken up to find that the boundary now runs through their fields. South Ossetia is one of several post-Soviet frozen conflicts. It coexists on the list of things that technically don't exist, but its particular position on Russia's southern flank, adjacent to the main Georgian military highway, does give it a strategic significance that the others lack. Number 11. Nagorno-Karabakh in the South Caucasus. The Republic of Artsakh, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh, is the only entry on this list that used to exist and it no longer does. For 32 years, from 1991 to 2023, it functioned as an unrecognized but de facto independent state in the mountains of the South Caucasus, a majority Armenian territory within the internationally recognized borders of Azerbaijan, governing itself without the consent of Baku or the recognition of anyone else, not even Armenia. It had a president, a parliament, a military, and a capital called Stepanakert, and then in September of 2023 it ceased to exist in the space of 24 hours. Azerbaijan launched a military offensive on 19 September 2023 after a 10-month blockade that had cut the territory's 120,000 residents off from food and medicine. The blockade had reduced the supply of bread to 1 loaf per family per day, and the military operation lasted less than a day before the Artsakh government agreed to surrender. Its president signed a decree dissolving all state institutions effective on January 1, 2024. Within a week of the surrender, more than 100,000 ethnic Armenians, approximately 99% of the remaining population, had fled through the Lachin corridor into Armenia, joining a column of vehicles that stretched for miles. The capital of Stepanakert was known by its Azerbaijani name of Kankendi, was virtually emptied. A city that had been the center of Armenian culture and political life in the region for decades stood largely abandoned within a week. The last evacuation bus left on October 2, 2023, and journalists who arrived shortly afterward described a city empty except for a handful of remaining residents. Azerbaijani telecommunication signals were already active in the abandoned streets, and the Armenian community that had lived in the highlands here for centuries were gone in a week. The republic, unrecognized by any country throughout its entire existence, ceased to exist on January 1, 2024. What remains is the mountain landscape that Armenians called home for millennia, and the question, contested with the specific ferocity of a dispute that's already produced 3 wars, of whether what happened in September of 2023 was reintegration or expulsion. It is, in this sense, unique on this list. It's a country that never officially existed, and then officially stopped non-existing. The lack of recognition that defined Artsakh in life also defined the world's response to its end. Number 10. Abkhazia on the Black Sea coast of Georgia. On the eastern shore of the Black Sea, where the subtropical forest runs down to meet the warm water and the peaks of the Caucasus Mountains from a dramatic backdrop, there's a territory of about 8,600 square kilometers called Abkhazia. Before the Soviet Union fell apart, it was a jewel, a resort destination for the Soviet elite, a place of grand sanatoriums and palm-lined boulevards. Today, it is a de facto independent republic recognized by 5 UN member states, Russia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Syria, and Nauru, and considered by the remaining 188 to be an occupied part of Georgia. The trouble began with the Soviet collapse. As Georgia moved towards independence in the late 1980s and early 90s, Abkhazia's population, ethnically distinct from Georgians with their own Abkhaz language and identity, pushed for a separate status. War broke out in 1992, and by 1994, a ceasefire had left Abkhazia outside Georgian control, but the fighting had displaced hundreds of thousands of ethnic Georgians from their homes in the territory. Abkhazia then declared independence in 1999, and no country recognized it. The population of ethnic Georgians who had been expelled, known internally as displaced persons in the diplomatic language that obscures the human reality, has never been allowed to return. The situation was transformed in 2008 when Russia recognized Abkhazia's independence following the brief Russia-Georgia war that also produced South Ossetia's de facto separation. Russian troops were deployed and Russian money flowed in. Russian tourists filled the old Soviet beach resorts, which are still beautiful and still largely dilapidated. The result was a territory that functions, if imperfectly, as an independent state in everything except international recognition. Abkhazia does have a president, a parliament, a military, even a currency, the Russian ruble, and a capital in Sukhumi, where the parliament building faces the Black Sea and the old Soviet-era hotels line the esplanade. Travel from Georgia into Abkhazia is considered illegal by Georgia, and it results in criminal charges. Travel from Russia is pretty straightforward, though. The tourism is growing again. The Soviet palaces of rest that were stripped by looters in the 1990s and just left to decay are slowly being renovated. The situation on the ground looks to a visitor from Russia like a peaceful seaside republic. It looks, from Tbilisi, like an occupied Georgian province. Both descriptions contain some truth. Georgia's stated position is that Russia's recognition of Abkhazia constitutes an illegal annexation of Georgian territory in all but name, and that the 250,000 ethnic Georgians displaced have a right of return that has never been granted. Abkhazia's stated position is that it's a sovereign state exercising its right to self-determination. Russia's position is that it recognized a legitimate government, and the Black Sea waves on the beach below Sukhumi make no distinction between any of these arguments. Number 9. Northern Cyprus. The island of Cyprus has been divided since 1974. In the north, there's the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. It's a state of about 380,000 people with its own elected government, its own flag, its own currency, and its own passports. It's operated continuously as a functioning entity for over 50 years, and it's recognized by exactly one country, Turkey, which now also happens to be the country whose military invasion created it. In July of 1974, following a coup backed by Greece's military that attempted to unite Cyprus with Greece, Turkey invaded and occupied the northern third of the island. The Turkish military advance displaced about 160,000 Greek Cypriots from the north and 45,000 Turkish Cypriots from the south, partitioning the island along what became known as the Green Line. That's a buffer zone running from Famagusta on the east coast to the west coast of Nicosia. It is patrolled by UN peacekeepers. In 1983, the Turkish Cypriot administration declared independence as the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The UN Security Council condemned the declaration and called it legally invalid. Turkey recognized it, and nobody else has since. What followed is the longest-running unresolved partition in modern European politics. Nicosia, the capital of the Republic of Cyprus in the south, is also the capital of the TRNC in the north, divided by the Green Line running through the city's Old Town. The reunification problem has never been solved, despite decades of negotiations. The South is a member of the European Union and considers the North to be occupied Cypriot territory. The North considers itself a legitimate state, and Turkish settlers have moved to the North in significant numbers, changing its demographic character in ways that Greek Cypriots argue is a deliberate policy of colonization. Greek Cypriot property in the North, abandoned during the 74 displacement, remains a source of legal and political dispute. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Turkey is responsible for ongoing human rights violations in North Cyprus, and Turkey maintains about 30,000 troops on the island and shows no sign of reducing that presence. The TRNC remains unrecognized by everyone except the country whose army put it there. Its residents travel on Turkish passports, its stamps are not accepted by international postal services, mail to northern Cyprus has to be addressed through Turkey, and it cannot participate in the Olympics under its own flag, and it can't join international organizations. It is, in every practical sense, except in formal recognition, a country, and it's been for longer than many recognized countries have existed in their current form. The Green Line through the Old Town has slowly normalized into something almost unremarkable. It's a border that tourists cross freely between coffee shops, carrying both the absurdity of partition and the pragmatic accommodation that 50 years of coexistence eventually produces. Number 8. The Western Sahara. In the desert of northwest Africa, there's a territory the size of the United Kingdom called Western Sahara. It sits between Morocco, Mauritania, and Algeria on the Atlantic coast. It's been one of the most enduring, unresolved colonial legacies on Earth for almost 50 years. And it's got an official government, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, that controls a thin strip of desert in the east, while Morocco controls the coast and the majority of the territory behind a 2,700-kilometer sand wall. It's one of the longest military barriers ever built. Spain governed Western Sahara as a colony until 1975, when it withdrew as part of an agreement that handed the territory to Morocco and Mauritania. The Polisario Front, a Sahrawi nationalist movement, declared independence on behalf of the Sahrawi people and began a guerrilla war. Mauritania eventually withdrew its claim in 1979. Morocco has never withdrawn. A 91 ceasefire brokered by the UN was supposed to lead to a referendum on self-determination. That referendum has never been held, and it's been pending for over 30 years, blocked by a fundamental disagreement about who would be eligible to vote. The SADR is recognized by 46 countries, and it's a full member of the African Union, meaning it participates in continental governance and votes on African Union matters. Around 170,000 Sahrawi refugees live in camps or on the Tindouf in western Algeria, administered by the Polisario Front government in exile. They've been there, in some cases for 50 years, a generation born, raised, and in many cases aged in refugee camps, while the referendum their parents were promised has failed to materialize. Morocco has invested heavily in this territory, building cities and infrastructure and massive phosphate mining operation, and Western Sahara does contain some of the world's largest phosphate reserves, which gives the territory an economic importance that makes Morocco considerably less willing to entertain independence. The United States, under the Trump administration in 2020, controversially recognized Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara in exchange for Morocco's normalization of relations with Israel, a move that delighted Rabat, infuriated the Polisario Front, and showed how the fate of the Sahrawi people can become a bargaining chip in negotiations about entirely unrelated arrangements. In late 2020, the ceasefire that had held since '91 collapsed, and low-level hostilities resumed between the Moroccan forces and Polisario fighters. The U.S. continues to maintain a peacekeeping mission in the territory. The referendum continues not to happen. The Sahrawis in the camp around the Tindouf continue to wait for an act of self-determination that now seems to many analysts like a promise the international system has collectively decided to indefinitely defer. Children born in the camps in '91, the year the referendum was first promised, are now in their 30s, and some have never seen Western Sahara. Their parents told them they could go home, and the world has been meaning to organize the vote that would allow that ever since. Moving on to number 7, Transnistria, Moldova. Between the Dniester River and the Ukrainian border, there's this sliver of territory about the size of Delaware called Transnistria, and it's been operating as an independent republic since 1990 without a single UN member state ever recognizing it, not even Russia, which provides the military, financial, and diplomatic support that allows it to function. It is the most thoroughly unrecognized functioning state on Earth, recognized only by Abkhazia and South Ossetia, both of which are themselves unrecognized. When the Soviet Union began to collapse and Moldova declared independence in 1990, the Russian-speaking population east of the Dniester, more culturally aligned with Moscow than with Chisinau, declared a separate republic. A brief but bloody war in 1992 ended with a Russian-brokered ceasefire. Russia's 14th Army, already stationed in the territory, remained, and it's still there, approximately 1,500 troops in what the Moldovan government calls an illegal occupation and what Russia calls a peacekeeping presence. Visiting Tiraspol, Transnistria's capital, it's been described by travelers as the most Soviet experience still available on Earth. Statues of Lenin stand in the central squares. The currency, the Transnistrian ruble, features a portrait of Alexander Suvorov, the Russian general who conquered the region in the 18th century. For 3 decades, the territory ran largely on Russian gas subsidies, creating an economic dependency that served as a soft power tool for maintaining a separate existence and giving Russia leverage over Moldova as a whole. The gas flowed, the Lenin statues stood, and the Soviet flag flew. The most comprehensively unrecognized state functioned in a kind of suspended animation, frozen like so many post-Soviet conflicts at the moment the USSR collapsed and nobody finished tidying up. This arrangement collapsed in early 2025, when Russia halted gas transit through Ukraine, cutting off Transnistria's supply and triggering the worst energy crisis the territory had ever faced. For the first time in its post-Soviet history, Transnistria found itself genuinely economically isolated from the Russian support structure that had sustained it. Whether this marks the beginning of Transnistria's reintegration into Moldova, or merely a difficult period in a conflict that survived every prediction of its resolution, is a question that analysts who have been wrong about Transnistria for 30 years are now cautiously addressing again. What's not in doubt, though, is that the territory exists, and it's always existed against the odds. A Soviet-themed breakaway state on the border of Ukraine, recognized by nobody, flying a hammer and sickle, sustained for 3 decades by a gas pipeline that no longer works. Number 6. Kosovo. Kosovo declared independence from Serbia on February 17, 2008, becoming the newest country in Europe, or, depending on your position in the dispute, remaining the newest breakaway region of Serbia. As of 2025, 110 out of 193 UN member states have recognized it, including the United States, UK, France, Germany, most of Europe. Russia and China have not, and since both hold permanent veto power in the UN Security Council, Kosovo has been blocked from UN membership since the day it declared independence. Kosovo was an autonomous province of Serbia within the former Yugoslavia, with a population that was about 90% ethnic Albanian. Following the brutal suppression of the Albanian independence movement by Serbian forces in the late 1990s, NATO launched a bombing campaign against Serbia in 1999, which ended with the UN administration taking over Kosovo. Russia, Serbia's key diplomatic ally, has vetoed Kosovo's UN membership applications, and the result is a country that simultaneously is real and legally suspended, operating a government, issuing passports, collecting taxes, and participating in international sports under its own flag. The European Union has poured billions into Kosovo's development, and the country is a candidate for EU membership, a process that does require the formal recognition of all existing EU member states, 5 of which, Spain, Greece, Slovakia, Romania, and Cyprus, have not recognized Kosovo, each for reasons connected to their own domestic concerns about separatist movements. The practical consequences for the 1.9 million people of Kosovo are pretty important and ongoing. Kosovo can't join the World Health Organization, a fact that became acutely relevant during the COVID-19 pandemic, when it was excluded from international coordination mechanisms. Kosovo cannot participate in the Interpol network, and Kosovo's passports are not accepted in Serbia, Russia, China, and many other countries. Serbian citizens in northern Kosovo, the minority Serb population that remains there, operate in a parallel structure funded by Belgrade, use Serbian currency, attend Serbian schools, and have largely refused to participate in Kosovo's elections and institutions. Relationships between Kosovo and Siberia have slowly, partially normalized with the documents, license plates, and some economic cooperation, but Serbia hasn't recognized Kosovo and has explicitly stated that it never will. Russia has stated, though, that it will veto Kosovo's UN membership for as long as Russia has a veto. Number 5. Catalonia on northeastern Spain. On October 1, 2017, millions of Catalans tried to vote in an independence referendum that the Spanish government had declared illegal. Spanish police and civil guard deployed in riot gear across the region raided polling stations, dragged voters from their seats, fired rubber bullets into the queuing crowds, and confiscated ballot boxes. By the end of the day, 893 people had been reported injured. The images, elderly men and women bleeding on polling station steps, people being thrown down the stairs by officers in body armor, were broadcast live to the world and caused immediate outrage across Europe. Despite the crackdown, though, about 2.3 million people managed to cast ballots. Of those who voted, 90% chose independence. The turnout was 43%, partly because many who opposed independence boycotted the vote, and partly because a significant number of polling stations had already been forcibly shut before people could reach them. What happened next was, in its own way, even stranger than the referendum itself. On October 10, 2017, Catalan President Charles Puigdemont stood before the Catalan Parliament, declared that he accepted the mandate of the people for Catalonia to become an independent republic, and then, in the same speech, suspended the declaration to allow time for dialogue with Madrid. A declaration of independence lasted approximately 8 seconds before being paused. 17 days later, on October 27th, the Catalan Parliament voted 70-10 to formally declare independence. Within hours, the Spanish government invoked Article 155 of the Constitution, a provision that had never before been used in Spain's democratic history, dissolving the Catalan government, dismissing Puigdemont and his entire cabinet, and calling snap elections. Puigdemont and 5 ministers fled to Belgium that night. 9 other officials were arrested, and the Republic of Catalonia, declared on a Friday afternoon, ceased to exist before the weekend was over. Catalonia is not a small or obscure region pushing an unlikely cause. It's one of the economic engines of Spain. It's home to over 8 million people, responsible for nearly 19% of Spain's entire GDP, the most export-oriented region in the country. The Catalan language, spoken by about 10 million people across the region and neighboring areas, has its own literature, its own media, and a cultural identity distinct enough from Castilian Spain to have survived 40 years of suppression under Franco's dictatorship. The independence movement that peaked in 2017 was not a fringe position. It had won a parliamentary majority in regional elections, and it commanded the active support of a substantial fraction of the population. The aftermath unfolded over years. 9 independence leaders were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 9 to 13 years. They were pardoned in 2021. Puigdemont remained in self-imposed exile in Belgium, subject to a Spanish arrest warrant for 7 years, continuing to lead his party, win elections, and participate in politics from abroad. In 2024, the Spanish parliament passed an amnesty law covering hundreds of people involved in the 2017 events. Puigdemont returned briefly and theatrically to Barcelona on the day of a new president's investiture, addressed a crowd of thousands, and left again before police could detain him. The independence movement, battered by years of legal proceedings and internal division, had lost support, dropping from nearly half of the electorate in 2017 to around 43% in the 2024 regional elections. It remains an autonomous community of Spain, with its own parliament, its own police force, its own language policy, and an independence movement that is not finished, but is, for now, in a different phase than it was that October afternoon, when the ballot boxes were hidden in the schools and the police arrived at dawn. Number 4. Somaliland. In the northwest corner of Somalia, along the southern coast of the Gulf of Aden, there's a country called Somaliland that's been governing itself for about 34 years. It's got a president, parliament, military, a police force, a currency, a passport, a national anthem, and a flag, and it's held multiple democratic elections, including a 24 presidential contest in which the opposition won and power transferred peacefully. One of only 5 such peaceful transfers recorded across all of Africa that year. It administers a territory of about 176,000 square kilometers and a population of about 6 million people. It's got its own foreign language policy, runs its own ports, and it maintains representative offices. For the first 3 decades of its existence, not a single country on Earth formally recognized it as a state. The territory corresponds almost exactly to the boundaries of the former British Somaliland Protectorate, which became independent on June 26, 1960, as the state of Somaliland, a fully recognized sovereign country that existed for 5 days before voluntarily merging with the former Italian Somalia to form Somali Republic. The union was voluntary. It was also, many Somalilanders argue, a catastrophic mistake. Power was centralized in the south, northern interests were marginalized, and under the military dictatorship of Siad Barre, the response, northern dissent, became increasingly brutal. Between 1987 and 89, Barre's forces killed an estimated 50 to 200,000 people in the north and destroyed much of Hargeisa, a regional capital. When the Somali National Movement overthrew Barre in 1991 and Somalia collapsed into civil war that's really never fully resolved, the northern clans simply declared independence from a country that no longer functioned and rebuilt from the ground up. While Somalia proper cycled through warlords, transitional governments, UN interventions, and an ongoing insurgency by the militant group Al-Shabaab, Somaliland maintained a functioning state. It built an army, it established a functioning court system, it kept the peace, imperfectly, with internal tensions and a contested eastern border, but recognizable. Freedom House rates Somaliland as partly free, a score higher than Somalia's not free, and comparable to several recognized African states. The argument most often made against recognizing Somaliland is the precedent that it would set. Africa's border, drawn by colonial powers with no regard for ethnic or cultural boundaries, have been maintained since independence under the principle that the idea of inherited borders, however arbitrary, must be respected to prevent the continent fragmenting into endless territorial disputes. Recognition of Somaliland, as the argument goes, would open a door that the dozens of other African separatist movements would rush through. It is a serious argument. Somaliland's counter-argument is equally serious, though, that it's not seceding from a functioning state, but restoring independence that existed before a voluntary union with a country that then collapsed. In December of 2025, Israel became the first UN member state to formally recognize Somaliland in a declaration signed in the spirit of the Abraham Accords. The African Union, Egypt, and Somalia's regional allies immediately condemned the move. Somaliland waited 34 years for its first recognition. Its first recognizer is a country that itself is not recognized by 28 UN member states, which does say something about the particular mathematics of international legitimacy. Number 3. Rojava, northeast Syria. In the oil-rich plains of northeastern Syria between the Euphrates River and the Iraqi border, there's a territory roughly the size of Switzerland that's been governing itself since 2012, under a political philosophy that's attracted the attention of governments, academics, anarchists, feminists, and military strategists all over the world. It's called Rojava by its Kurdish population and more formally the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. It is not recognized as a state by Syria, by Turkey, by the United States, by Russia, or by any other government on earth, with the sole exception of the Catalan parliament, which itself is not a state. The administration here declared autonomy in July of 2012 when Syrian government forces withdrew from the Kurdish majority areas to concentrate on the civil war further south. The political project that filled the vacuum was built on the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned founder of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, who had spent his years in a Turkish prison developing a philosophy he called democratic confederalism, a model of decentralized, non-hierarchical governance, organized around local assemblies with gender equality mandated at every level of the system. Every political and administrative position in Rojava is required to have both a male and a female co-holder. Women's councils operate independently within the structure. The all-female military force, the YPJ, became globally known during the Battle for Kobane in 2014, when Kurdish fighters, men and women, held the town against an ISIS siege. It lasted 134 days with U.S. air support and eventually drove ISIS back. That battle made Rojava internationally famous, and it turned the Syrian Democratic Forces into the primary U.S. partner in the campaign against ISIS in Syria. The fundamental tension in Rojava's existence is that it's genuinely useful to too many actors who would nonetheless never formally acknowledge it. The United States needs it as a partner against ISIS, but can't recognize it without alienating Turkey, a NATO ally that regards the YPG, the Kurdish core of the SDF, as an extension of the PKK, a designated terrorist organization. Well, Turkey has launched multiple military operations into their territory, occupying Afrin in 2018 and Serikaniye in 2019. Syria's government has always considered the territory its own, and has at various points cooperated with Rojava against ISIS while refusing to grant it any formal status. Russia has used Rojava as a bargaining chip in negotiations with both Turkey and the Assad government, and for everyone involved, Rojava is mostly useful as an unrecognized entity that can be supported, pressured, or invaded as the circumstances require. Following the fall of Assad in December of 2024, Rojava's position shifted dramatically. The new Syrian transitional government, dominated by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an Islamist rebel group, launched an offensive into northeastern Syria in early 2026. A ceasefire and integration agreement signed in January of 26 provided the withdrawal for the SDF forces, the entry of government troops into the key Kurdish cities, and guarantees of Kurdish civil and cultural rights under the new Syrian state. The administration that governed here built something genuinely unusual in the time that it had. A ratified constitution, the social contract, guaranteeing gender equality, cultural rights for all ethnic groups, freedom of religion, and decentralized governments. They had 3 universities, a healthcare system rebuilt from scratch during wartime, an economy running on oil revenues, and cooperative agriculture. Whether this experiment survives integration into new Syria, whether democratic confederalism finds a place inside a state led by a movement with very different ideological roots, is the question that, as this video was made, nobody could answer yet. Few predictions about this particular corner of the world have survived contact with events for long. Number 2. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta. In the 16th century palazzo on a narrow street in central Rome, there's the headquarters of a country. It occupies one building. The building's roughly the size of a large house. It's got no neighbors that recognize it as a foreign country, no border post, no customs checkpoint, and no citizenry in the conventional sense. The Order of Malta has approximately 3 full citizens at any given time, all of them senior officers. It's got no land, it has never in its current form governed a single square meter of sovereign territory. And it maintains formal diplomatic relations with 115 countries, holds permanent observer status at the United Nations, issues its own passports, stamps its own coins, prints its own postage stamps, and registers its own license plates. It's been doing most of this for nearly 1,000 years. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta, formerly the Sovereign Military Hospitaller Order of St. John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta, was founded in Jerusalem in the year 1099 as a hospital to care for pilgrims to the Holy Land. The Pope recognized it as an independent religious order in the year 1113, granting it exemptions from local authority that formed the basis of its claim to sovereignty. And over the following centuries, it became one of the most powerful military organizations in the world, governing territories across the eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus, Rhodes for 2 centuries, and finally Malta itself, granted by the Holy Roman Emperor in 1530. Napoleon ended that chapter in 1798 when French forces took Malta in a single morning. The knights surrendered with barely a shot fired, retreated into a long statelessness that drifted across European courts, and eventually it settled in Rome, where they've been ever since. The order does continue to issue documents, maintain diplomatic relations with European courts, and operate in humanitarian missions throughout the 19th century. By the time the international law developed robust theories of statehood in the 20th century, the order had been operating as a sovereign entity for so long and was recognized by enough states that its status simply persisted. The Italian Supreme Court confirmed in 1974 that the order constitutes a sovereign international subject in all terms equal, even without territory to a foreign state. The palazzo and villa are recognized as extraterritorial by Italy, giving them diplomatic status of embassies without there being a recognizable country behind them. It does carry a country code XOM assigned by the International Civil Aviation Organization, and it's accepted as a valid travel document by all 115 states that maintain diplomatic relations with the order. From its single palazzo in Rome, the order runs humanitarian programs in over 120 countries. It is not quite like anything else. It simply continues, older than most nations, recognized by more governments than many full UN members, operating out of a building in Rome that is simultaneously Italian soil and not Italian soil, and it defies every category that international law has tried to put it in for the last 2 centuries. Number 1. Taiwan. In 1971, the Republic of China lost its seat in the United Nations. It had held that seat since the UN's founding in 1945. As a founding member, as a permanent member of the Security Council, as one of the 5 countries with veto power over every decision the most powerful international body in the world makes. Then in October of 1971, Resolution 2758 passed the General Assembly, transferring China's seat to the People's Republic of China on the mainland. The Republic of China was expelled, its representatives walked out of the General Assembly Hall, and the country that had been recognized as the government of China for 26 years, a country of 15 million people on an island in the Western Pacific with its own military constitution, democratic elections, and one of the most significant economies in Asia, ceased in formal international terms to exist. Taiwan today is recognized by 12 UN member states plus the Holy See. Now, that number has been falling steadily as Beijing offers economic incentives to smaller states to switch recognition from Taipei to Beijing, a campaign that's cost Taiwan 10 diplomatic partners since 2016 alone. Most of the world's major economies, the United States, Germany, Japan, Australia, South Korea, and the UK, don't formally recognize Taiwan, maintain no official embassies there, and refer to the island's status as a matter for the Chinese people to resolve. This kind of diplomatic architecture is called the One China policy, and it's among the most widely observed fictions in international relations. Because what it describes is a question to be resolved, in practice, a fully functioning democracy of 23 million people with an elected president, a legislative parliament, an independent judiciary, and a military force equipped with American weapons, even a diplomatic corps operating out of offices pointedly not called embassies, and an economy that produces more than 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. Taiwan's semiconductor dominance is the most important geopolitical fact most people have never thought about carefully. TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, fabricates chips for Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, and essentially every other company that designs advanced processors. No other facility on Earth can currently produce chips at the most advanced nodes at scale. Taiwan is, in this specific sense, the most critical single point of failure in the global technology supply chain. The island that officially doesn't exist is one that the modern world most cannot afford to lose. The People's Republic of China regards Taiwan as a breakaway province that will eventually, by negotiation or by force, return to mainland Chinese sovereignty. This position has been consistent since 1949, when the nationalist government fled to Taiwan after losing the Chinese Civil War, and has maintained ever since that it's the legitimate government of all of China, a claim that it's gradually and quietly set aside in practice while preserving it in theory. Beijing has never renounced the use of force to take Taiwan. Military exercises around the island have intensified in frequency and scale. American arms sales to Taiwan, authorized under the Taiwan Relations Act, despite the absence of formal recognition, does continue. The United States won't say definitively whether it would defend Taiwan militarily if China invaded. China will not say definitively whether or when it would invade. Taiwan goes about its daily business: elections, night markets, bubble tea, and 23 million people living their lives on an island that, on paperwork of 181 countries, doesn't fully exist. Of all the entries on this list, Taiwan is the one where the gap between official status and practical reality is the largest. It's the most consequential and most dangerous. A micronation on a North Sea platform is an amusing anomaly. An unrecognized Soviet throwback on the Dniester is a frozen oddity. An island of 23 million people that makes the chips that run the world, sitting 160 kilometers off the coast of a nuclear-armed superpower that claims it, protected by the implicit guarantee of another nuclear-armed superpower, under a diplomatic framework that everyone maintains and nobody believes. That's something else entirely. That's the question that the 21st century has not yet answered, that every answer so far has deferred, and that does sit unresolved at the center of the most consequential geopolitical relationship on the planet.